The chronic hunting pack had been stalking Rex Thompson for 3 hours through the crystalline canyons of Titan 7, their predatory howls echoing off the mineral formations like death songs. Rex pressed his back against a jagged outcropping, his welding torch hissing softly as he adjusted the flame intensity and tried to ignore the way his environmental suit's proximity sensors were screaming warnings about multiple large life forms converging on his position. Just another day at the office, he muttered into his helmet comm, though the channel had been dead for 6 hours ever since the chronic hunting fleet had destroyed the orbital construction platform where Rex had been installing atmospheric processors in conditions that would have killed any other species within minutes. The irony wasn't lost on him that he'd survived the initial attack, only to end up trapped on a planet whose surface temperature could melt steel and whose atmosphere was so corrosive that even his military-grade environmental suit was showing stress fractures. The first chronic appeared at the canyon's mouth like a nightmare made flesh. 3 meters tall, covered in chitinous plates that gleamed like black metal, with 6 arms ending in claws designed for rending both metal and meat. The species had earned a reputation throughout the galaxy as the ultimate predators hunters, so efficient that entire civilizations paid tribute rather than risk their attention. Rex had been welding structural supports in zero-G vacuum for most of his adult life. He'd worked in radiation fields that would cook most aliens, in gravitational anomalies that bent space-time itself, in the hearts of dying stars where the fundamental forces of physics became merely suggestions. A pack of oversized bugs with anger management issues didn't particularly impress him. "All right, boys," he said to the approaching chronic, raising his welding torch like a weapon. "Let's see how tough you really are." The lead chronic made a sound that might have been laughter if laughter could strip flesh from bone. It gestured with 2 of its arms, and Rex heard the scraping of claws on crystal as more of the creatures began descending the canyon walls. Pack had been playing with him, herding him into a kill zone where he'd have no escape routes. Rex activated his torch's maximum output and watched the flame extend nearly 2 meters from the nozzle hot, enough to cut through ship hulls, bright, enough to be visible from orbit. The chronic hesitated for the first time since the hunt began, their heat-sensing organs registering temperatures that shouldn't have been survivable for any organic being. "That's right," Rex said conversationally, as if he were discussing me. Whether, instead of preparing to fight for his life against creatures that had never lost a hunt in recorded galactic history. "See, the thing about being a human welder is that we work in places that kill everything else. We're not fast, we're not particularly smart, and we definitely ain't pretty. But we're stubborn, and we're really, really good at making things hot." The lead chronic charged, moving with inhuman speed across the crystal formations. Rex didn't try to dodge. Humans couldn't outrun chronic, and everyone in the galaxy knew it. Instead, he did something that no prey species in the chronic's experience had ever attempted. He charged back. The collision should have been the end of Rex Thompson, a 180-pound human in a bulky environmental suit against a 3-meter-tall apex predator with reflexes that could track starfighter movements. But Rex had spent 30 years learning to work with tools that could kill him faster than any biological weapon, and his welding torch met the chronic's charge with a precision that turned predator into metal sculpture. The creature's death scream echoed through the canyon like the sound of tearing steel, and suddenly Rex found himself facing 7 very angry aliens who had just watched him do something that wasn't supposed to be possible. "Next," he said calmly, adjusting his torch settings to compensate for the wind patterns in the canyon. But even as the remaining chronic prepared for another assault, Rex noticed something unexpected moving in the shadows at the canyon's far end. Something small and quick that definitely wasn't part of the hunting pack, something that looked almost like it was trying to help. The second chronic attack came from 3 directions simultaneously, a coordinated assault that would have overwhelmed any conventional defense. Rex's response was unconventional in the extreme. Instead of trying to defend himself, he attacked the canyon wall. His torch, set to maximum dispersion, turned a section of the crystalline formation into an improvised, explosive device. The thermal shock shattered the mineral structure, sending razor-sharp fragments through the air like shrapnel, while simultaneously creating a cloud of superheated gas that forced the Kronek to retreat or risk having their sensory organs permanently damaged. In the chaos that followed, Rex saw the mysterious shadow creature more clearly. It was roughly the size of a large cat, covered in what appeared to be natural armor plating, with 6 legs and a flexible tail that ended in something that looked suspiciously like a natural plasma cutter. More importantly, it was systematically disabling the Kronek's retreat routes by cutting through key structural supports in the canyon walls. "Well, I'll be damned," Rex said. Watching as the creature, he found himself thinking of it as sparks because of the way its tail cut her through. Off-energy discharges continued, its sabotage work with the kind of precision that reminded him of his own approach to structural engineering. "Looks like I'm not the only one who knows how to use tools around here." The remaining Kronek were beginning to realize that their hunt had become something else entirely. The canyon that had seemed like a perfect kill zone was rapidly turning into a trap, with escape routes disappearing under Spark's methodical demolition work, and their quarry proving far more dangerous than any prey species should have been. Rex took advantage of their confusion to advance, his welding torch carving through the superheated air like a sword made of contained starfire. The Kronek had evolved to hunt creatures that ran from them, that tried to hide or escape. They had no experience dealing with prey that came at them, with tools designed to work in the heart of fusion reactors. "The thing about humans," Rex said conversationally as he cornered another Kronek against a crystal wall, "is that we don't really have natural weapons. No claws, no armor plating, no built-in plasma cutters. But we've got something better. We make friends with things that can kill us, and then we use them to kill everything else." The torch made short work of the Kronek's natural armor. As the creature fell, Rex caught a glimpse of Sparks watching from a nearby outcropping, its large eyes reflecting an intelligence that was definitely not animal level. The creature chirped, once a sound like electronic music mixed with the hum of efficient machinery, and gestured toward the canyon's exit with its plasma cutter tail. "Yeah," Rex agreed, understanding the communication despite the language barrier. "I think it's time we got out of here too. But first... He turned to face the remaining 4 Kronek, who had finally realized that their reputation as invincible hunters was about to take a serious hit from a human welder and his new alien partner. "Who's next?" Rex asked, raising his torch to cast. Dancing shadows across the canyon walls. The answer came in the form of a coordinated retreat, the first time in recorded galactic history that a Kronek hunting pack had fled from prey. But as Rex and Sparks watched them disappear into the crystal maze of Titan VII's surface, both of them understood that the real hunt was just beginning, because somewhere out there was a Kronek mothership with a crew that would not take kindly to learning that their supposedly invincible hunters had been defeated by a human tradesman and a small alien creature with a talent for demolition work. "Well, Sparks," Rex said, patting the creature's armored head with surprising gentleness, "looks like we're going to need a plan. Good thing I've always been better at building things than tearing them down." The creature's response was a complex harmony of electronic sounds that Rex somehow understood meant agreement, followed by anticipation, followed by something that might have been alien laughter. As they began making their way through the crystal canyons toward whatever shelter they could find. Rex couldn't shake the feeling that he just made the kind of friend that was going to change everything about humanity's place in a galaxy full of predators. He just hoped they'd both live long enough to see what that change looked like. Finding Shelter on Titan 7 turned out to be less of a challenge than Rex had expected, thanks to Spark's intimate knowledge of the planet's crystal formations. The creature led him through a maze of interconnected caverns that were not only naturally shielded from the planet's hostile surface conditions, but also seemed to be artificially enhanced with what looked like sophisticated environmental controls. "Now this is interesting," Rex said, examining the walls of the cavern where Sparks had brought him to rest. His torch flame revealed carved channels in the crystalline structure that appeared to be conducting and regulating airflow, temperature, and even atmospheric composition. "Sparks, did your people build this place?" The creature responded with a series of harmonic tones that Rex was beginning to recognize as complex communication. Sparks moved to one of the wall carvings and touched it with its plasma cutter tail. Immediately, the entire chamber began to glow with soft, warm light that revealed the true scope of what they'd discovered. The cavern wasn't just a natural formation. It was an engineering masterpiece. Crystal formations had been shaped and connected to create a self-sustaining life support system that could maintain optimal conditions for dozens of different atmospheric requirements simultaneously. Rex's environmental suit registered that the chamber's atmosphere was not only breathable for humans, but actually superior to Earth, normal in terms of oxygen content and trace element composition. "Holy shit," Rex whispered, removing his helmet for the first time in 8 hours. The air tasted clean and sharp, with an almost electric quality that made him feel more alert and energetic than he had any right to feel after fighting for his life. "Sparks, this isn't just shelter. This is technology that's centuries ahead of anything humans have developed." But even as he marveled at the engineering around him, Rex's trained eye was picking up details that told a different story. The crystal formations showed signs of damage and hasty repair work. The environmental systems, while functional, were operating at maybe 60% of their designed capacity. And throughout the chamber, he could see evidence of recent habitation by creatures roughly Sparks, size evidence that suggested a population far larger than the single individual who had helped him escape the Chronic. "Where is everyone?" Rex asked, though he was beginning to suspect he already knew the answer. Sparks moved to another section of the wall and activated what was clearly a display system. Holographic images filled the chamber, showing the recent history of Titan 7 in brutal detail. Rex watched in growing horror as Chronic hunting fleets descended on what had clearly been a thriving civilization of Sparks, people, a species that called themselves the Kethara. According to the translation algorithms, his suit was able to piece together from the displayed information. The Kethara had been master engineers, builders who worked with living crystal, the way humans worked with metal and ceramics. They had transformed Titan 7 from a hostile death world into a paradise of interconnected, underground cities that could support millions of inhabitants while maintaining perfect ecological balance with the planet's natural systems. And the Chronic had destroyed it all in less than a week, hunting the Kethara for sport, until only scattered survivors remained hidden in the deep caverns. "Jesus," Rex said softly, watching scenes of crystal cities collapsing under Chronic assault. "They didn't just hunt your people, they wiped out an entire civilization for fun." Sparks made a sound that Rex was learning to recognize as grief. But underneath it was something else, a harmonic pattern that suggested not just sadness, but determination. The creature moved to a section of the display that showed technical schematics, and Rex realized with growing excitement that Sparks was showing him weapons. Not conventional weapons. The Kethara had been builders, not warriors, but they had been builders who understood energy manipulation, crystal resonance, and environmental engineering on a level that made human technology look primitive. The weapons they had developed were more like large-scale engineering tools repurposed for defense, devices that could destabilize crystal formations across entire regions, atmospheric manipulators that could turn a planet's weather into a weapon, and most intriguingly, resonance amplifiers that could turn the planet's entire crystal network into a massive communication and coordination system. Sparks, Rex said, slowly studying the schematics with the eye of someone who had spent decades learning how to make things work in impossible conditions. Are you showing me how to fight back? The creature's response was complex agreement, mixed with hope, mixed with uncertainty. But Rex was beginning to understand the real communication. Sparks wasn't just showing him Cathara weapons. The creature was asking for Rex's help to build them. The Cathara had been master engineers, but they had been specialists in crystal-based technology. Rex was a human welder who understood energy systems, plasma dynamics, and structural engineering from an entirely different perspective. Together, they might be able to combine their knowledge to create something that neither species could have achieved alone. All right, Rex said, settling into the kind of focused problem-solving mode that had carried him through 3 decades of impossible welding jobs. Let's see what we can build. But first, I need to understand something. How many of your people are still alive down here? Sparks activated another section of the display, and Rex's heart sank as he saw the numbers. Of the millions of Cathara who had once inhabited Titan 7, fewer than 1,000 survived, scattered throughout the deep cavern systems and living in constant fear of chronic hunting parties. 1,000, Rex said quietly, against a hunting fleet that probably has tens of thousands of chronic. But even as he said it, Rex was thinking like an engineer rather than a soldier. Numbers mattered, but so did leverage. The chronic were powerful individual fighters, but they were hunters, not builders. They understood destruction, but not creation. They were operating on the surface of a planet that had been engineered by a species that understood energy manipulation and environmental control on a scale the chronic had never encountered. Sparks, Rex said, his excitement growing as the plan began to form in his mind. Your people built this entire planet into one giant machine, didn't they? These crystal formations, the atmospheric controls, the environmental systems, it's all connected. The creature's response was enthusiastic agreement, followed by complex harmonic patterns that Rex interpreted as technical specifications. The Cathara hadn't just lived on Titan 7. They had transformed it into a single, planet-spanning engineering project that could manipulate everything from local gravity fields to the electromagnetic spectrum. And the chronic had been so focused on hunting individual Cathara that they had never realized they were standing on top of the largest weapon system ever constructed. We're not going to fight them, Rex said, grinning with the kind of dangerous enthusiasm that had gotten him into trouble throughout his career. We're going to engineer them into extinction. But I'm going to need help from every Cathara engineer still alive, and we're going to need to work faster than either of our species has ever worked before. Sparks moved to the communication array and began broadcasting a complex signal through the planet's crystal network. Within minutes, the cavern began filling with Cathara survivors, creatures similar to Sparks but each with subtle variations that suggested different engineering. Species found himself surrounded by what amounted to the last remnants of a master engineer species, all of them looking to him with a mixture of hope and desperation that he recognized from his own worst construction disasters. All right, people, he said, adjusting his welding torch to its lowest setting so the light wouldn't be threatening. Let's build something that'll make the chronic regret they ever heard of this planet. And let's build it before they realize what we're up to. The harmonic chorus of agreement that rose from the assembled Cathara sounded like the song of a crystalline wind chime played by a hurricane. But underneath the alien music, Rex could hear something that was perfectly familiar, the sound of engineers who had just been given a seemingly impossible problem and were already figuring out how to solve it. As the first technical hologram flickered to life in the center of the chamber, showing the beginnings of what would become the most ambitious engineering project in galactic history. Rex couldn't help but smile. The Chronic thought they were hunters. They were about to learn the difference between hunting prey and engineering predators. The first phase of what Rex had started calling Operation Crystal Storm required something that went against every instinct he'd developed in 30 years of construction work, deliberately damaging perfectly good engineering systems. But as he and the Cathara engineering teams worked through the planet's network of crystal caverns, Rex began to understand that sometimes you had to break things before you could make them better. The resonance cascade will require precise timing. Zircon, the Cathara engineer Rex had assigned as his primary liaison, communicated through the complex harmonic patterns that Rex was learning to interpret with surprising fluency. If the frequency synchronization is even slightly off, the entire network could collapse instead of weaponizing. Rex paused in his welding work to study the crystal formation they were modifying. His torch had been recalibrated to work with Cathara crystal growing techniques, allowing him to fuse human metallurgy with alien engineering in ways that produced results neither species could have achieved alone. The hybrid systems they were creating looked like something from a fever dream, organic crystal structures interwoven with precisely welded metal supports, creating technological artifacts that pulsed with their own internal energy. Zircon. I've been thinking about the cascade timing, Rex said, using the simplified name he'd given his alien partner because the creature's actual designation was a 17 harmonic sound pattern that took 3 minutes to pronounce correctly. What if we don't try to synchronize the entire network at once? What if we build it in stages, like a construction project? Sparks, who had become Rex's constant companion and unofficial translator for the more complex Cathara communications, chittered with what Rex had learned was excitement. The creature moved to the holographic display they'd set up to show the planet's crystal network and began highlighting sections in different colors. The display that emerged was breathtaking in its scope. Titan VII's crystal formations weren't just decorative geology. They were a three-dimensional circuit board that spanned the entire planet, with major nodes connected by energy conduits that ran through the planet's crust like a nervous system. The Cathara had literally turned their world into a single, massive machine that could manipulate matter and energy on a planetary scale. Phase construction, Rex said, understanding flooding through him as he studied Spark's modifications to the display. We don't activate the whole thing at once. We bring sections online sequentially, each one amplifying the next. Like building a really big, really dangerous pipe organ. The assembled Cathara engineers responded with harmonics that Rex interpreted as a mixture of admiration and concern. What he was proposing would work, but it would also require the kind of precise coordination that normally took years of planning and testing. They had maybe days before the Chronic realized that their prey had stopped running and started building. I know it's risky, Rex said, adjusting his torch settings to begin work on the next crystal node, but we're not exactly dealing with a low-risk situation here. The way I see it, we've got 3 options. We can hide down here until the Chronic get bored and leave. We can try to fight them conventionally and get slaughtered, or we can do something so completely insane that they never see it coming. Zircon's response carried harmonics that Rex was learning to associate with Cathara humor, a sound like wind chimes laughing. Human Rex Thompson, your species' approach to engineering problems continues to surprise us. Most sapient beings, when faced with impossible technical challenges, become more conservative in their solutions. Yeah, well, Rex replied, his torch carving precise modifications into the crystal structure. Most sapient beings don't spend their careers welding in places that actively try to kill them. You learn to get creative when your workplace is a fusion reactor core. But even as he worked, Rex could feel the pressure of time running out. His suit's passive sensors were picking up increased Chronic activity on the planet's surface. The hunting fleet was getting impatient, and their search patterns were becoming more systematic. It would only be a matter of time before they discovered the extensive tunnel network that the Cathara had been using to survive. "How long until we can test the first phase?" Rex asked, completing the modifications to the current crystal node. And moving on to the next one in the sequence, Sparks moved to the communication array and broadcast a query through the network. The response came back as a cascade of harmonic patterns from engineering teams throughout the planet, reports on construction progress, resource availability, and system readiness that painted a picture of coordinated activity on a scale that impressed even Rex's construction-hardened sensibilities. 18 hours, Zircon translated. But human Rex Thompson, we must understand, this has never been attempted before. The theoretical models suggest success, but the margin for error is non-existent, Rex finished. I know, but here's the thing about construction work half the time. The theoretical models are wrong anyway. Sometimes you just have to build it and see if it works. The next few hours passed in a blur of intense technical work that pushed both human and Cathara engineering to their limits. Rex found himself working alongside creatures who understood energy manipulation in ways that challenged everything he thought he knew about physics, while the Cathara engineers learned to appreciate the brutal simplicity of human problem-solving approaches. The hybrid systems they created defied easy categorization. Crystal networks that incorporated welded metal supports to handle energy loads that would have shattered pure crystal. Plasma conduits that used human-style containment fields to direct energy flows in patterns that Cathara crystal resonance alone couldn't achieve. Environmental control systems that combined atmospheric processing techniques from two completely different technological philosophies. "It's beautiful," Rex said, stepping back to admire their work on the primary coordination node. The chamber around them now looked like the interior of a technological cathedral, with crystal formations and metal supports creating geometric patterns that seemed to pulse with their own internal rhythm. But the real test came when Sparks activated the communication array and broadcast the activation sequence through the modified network. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, slowly, the crystal formations throughout the chamber began to glow with soft, steady light that gradually increased in intensity until the entire cavern was illuminated like daylight. More importantly, Rex's suit sensors began registering energy signatures from crystal formations throughout the planet. The network was coming online, section by section, exactly as they had planned. Phase 1 active, Zircon reported, the harmonics carrying a note of wonder that transcended species boundaries. Energy flow stable, resonance cascade holding steady. Human Rex Thompson, I believe your impossible plan is actually working. But before Rex could respond, alarms began sounding throughout the cavern. Sparks quickly accessed the surface, monitoring systems, and displayed the source of the emergency. The Chronic had detected the energy signatures from the activated crystal network, and they were responding exactly as Rex had hoped they would. The hunting fleet was coming down to investigate personally. Perfect, Rex said, his grin visible even through his environmental suit's faceplate. Sparks, are you ready to show these guys what happens when you mess with engineers? The creature's response was a complex harmony that combined determination, anticipation, and something that sounded remarkably like predatory satisfaction. The Chronic ships began their descent toward Titan VII's surface. Rex and his Cathara partners prepared to demonstrate that sometimes the best defense was a really good offense, especially when that offense involved turning an entire planet into a weapon system that no hunting fleet in galactic history had ever encountered. All right, everyone, Rex said into the communication system, addressing the 1,000 Cathara engineers scattered throughout the planet. Showtime. Let's give our guests a welcome they'll never forget. The harmonic chorus of agreement that rose from the Crystal Network sounded like the song of an entire world preparing for war. The Chronic assault began, exactly as Rex had predicted, with overwhelming force applied through predictable, tactical patterns that assumed their prey would either flee or die quickly. What Fleet Commander Thrax and his hunting pack hadn't expected was for the planet itself to fight back. The first wave of Chronic dropships entered Titan VII's atmosphere just as Rex activated Phase 2 of Operation Crystal Storm. The effect was immediate and spectacular. The planet's crystal formations began resonating in perfect harmony, creating standing wave patterns in the atmosphere that turned the relatively stable air currents into a maze of wind shears and pressure differentials that could tear apart anything not designed for atmospheric flight. Surface conditions nominal, came the report from Chronic Pilot Command, transmitted through the communication frequencies that Sparks had taught Rex to monitor. No significant atmospheric resistance detected. Rex grinned as he watched the readouts. From the Crystal Network, the Chronic instruments couldn't detect what was happening because their sensors were designed to measure static conditions, not dynamic energy systems that were actively adapting to their presence. 3.2.1. Rex counted down, his finger poised over the activation control for the atmospheric manipulation system. The first Chronic dropship hit the modified atmospheric conditions like a fighter craft running into an invisible wall. The pressure wave that Rex and the Cathara had engineered didn't destroy the ship. It flipped it end over end and sent it spinning into a controlled crash that left the crew alive but thoroughly disoriented. What the hell was that? Came the panic transmission from the dropship's pilot, broadcast on frequencies that the Chronic apparently thought were secure. That, Rex said to Sparks, was just the welcome mat. Now let's show them the real party. Phase 3 activated as the remaining Chronic ships adjusted their approach patterns to compensate for the atmospheric anomalies. This time, the planet's response was more subtle but far more effective. Instead of trying to knock the ships out of the sky, the Crystal Network began affecting their navigation systems. Rex watched with satisfaction as the Chronic fleet's formation began to break apart. The ship's instruments were telling their pilots that they were flying straight and level, but the Crystal Network's electromagnetic manipulation was gradually redirecting them towards specific landing zones that the Cathara engineering teams had prepared with special care. Landing Zone Alpha, report, came Fleet Commander Thrax's voice over the communication system. Sir, we're detecting massive mineral deposits in this area, replied the lead ground team. Crystal formations that appear to be naturally occurring, but show signs of structural modification. Rex exchanged what he was learning to recognize as a Cathara smile with Sparks. The Chronic had landed exactly where they wanted them, in the heart of a crystal formation that had been modified to function as the world's largest resonance amplifier. Zircon, Rex called to his primary Cathara partner. Are you ready with the subsurface systems? The alien engineer's harmonic response carried notes of anticipation mixed with what Rex had learned was the Cathara equivalent of savage satisfaction. After weeks of hiding while their people were hunted for sport, the surviving engineers were looking forward to demonstrating that builders could be just as dangerous as destroyers. Phase 4 began as the Chronic ground teams started their standard search patterns. The planet's Crystal Network, now fully active across 3 continents, began what Rex privately thought of as the demonstration, a carefully orchestrated sequence of geological effects that would show the Chronic exactly how outclassed they were. It started small. Crystal formations near the Chronic teams began resonating at frequencies that interfered with their communication systems. Equipment that had worked perfectly in the ships began malfunctioning in ways that seemed random, but were actually carefully planned to create maximum confusion and frustration. Command were experiencing technical difficulties, reported the first ground team. Our targeting systems are showing ghost readings, and our atmospheric analyzers are registering impossible. Atmospheric compositions. Adapt and overcome, came Thrax's reply. But Rex could hear the uncertainty creeping into the fleet commander's voice. The Chronic were predators who succeeded through overwhelming superiority, not technical problem-solving. Phase 5 escalated. The demonstration into something that no Chronic hunting party had ever experienced. The crystal formations began actively reshaping the landscape around the ground teams, creating passages where none had existed, and closing off routes that had been clear moments before. Rex monitored the Chronic communications as confusion turned to concern and then to something approaching panic. These were hunters who had never encountered prey that could manipulate their environment on this scale, and their tactical doctrine had no provisions for dealing with a planet that was actively trying to confuse and isolate them. "This is impossible," came one transmission. "The terrain is changing faster than our mapping systems can track. It's like the planet is alive." "The planet is alive," Rex said to Sparks, watching as the final phase of their plan approached activation. "That's what they never understood about your people. You didn't just live on this world, you became part of it." The climax came when Fleet Commander Thrax made the decision that Rex had been counting on. Instead of retreating to analyze the situation, the Chronic leader chose to escalate. He ordered his orbital bombardment platforms to begin surface strikes against the crystal formations that were causing the most problems for his ground teams. "Target the primary mineral deposits," came Thrax's command. "If the planet wants to play games with us, we'll show it what happens to worlds that interfere with Chronic hunts." Rex felt a moment of genuine respect for the Chronic commander. The alien was making exactly the decision that Rex would have made. In his position, when faced with an unknown problem, apply overwhelming force until the problem goes away. Unfortunately for Thrax, he had just triggered the activation condition for Phase 6, planetary self-defense. "Sparks," Rex said quietly, "it's time." The final phase of Operation Crystal Storm activated as the first orbital bombardment struck Titan 7's surface. But instead of destroying the crystal formations, the energy from the Chronic weapons was absorbed, amplified, and redirected through the planet's entire network. The effect was unlike anything in recorded galactic history. Every crystal formation on the planet began resonating at the same frequency, creating a harmonic wave that propagated through the planet's crust and into space itself. The Chronic ships, caught in the resonance field, found their hull plating beginning to vibrate at frequencies that threatened to tear their vessels apart. "Emergency retreat." Thrax's voice carried a note of panic that Rex had never heard from a Chronic before. "All units, immediate evacuation. This planet is some kind of weapon system." But Rex and the Cathara engineers had planned for that possibility. 2. The Crystal Network's final surprise was a localized, gravitational manipulation field that made faster-than-light travel impossible within the system. The Chronic fleet was trapped, held in place by forces they couldn't understand or counter. "Fleet Commander Thrax," Rex said, broadcasting on the Chronic command frequency, with Sparks translating his words into the appropriate harmonics. "This is Rex Thompson, human engineer and representative of the Cathara people. I think it's time we had a conversation." The silence that followed was broken only by the harmonic resonance of a planet that had become a single, massive musical instrument, one that was currently playing a song of victory that could be heard from orbit. "Human," came Thrax's voice, carrying a mixture of rage and grudging respect. "What do you want?" "I want," Rex replied, settling back in his chair in the crystal cavern that had become his command center, "to explain to you why hunting engineers is a really, really bad idea." As Sparks and the other Cathara engineers began broadcasting the terms of what Rex privately thought of as the education of Fleet Commander Thrax, Rex couldn't help but reflect on how much his life had changed since he'd first encountered a small alien creature with a talent for demolition work. He'd come to Titan 7 as a welder. He was leaving as an ambassador for a new kind of interspecies cooperation, one based on mutual respect, shared engineering challenges, and the understanding that builders would always be more dangerous than destroyers, given sufficient motivation and preparation time. The negotiation between Rex Thompson and Fleet Commander Thrax took place in what Rex privately considered the most unusual conference room in galactic history, a crystalline chamber deep within Titan 7 that had been modified to support atmospheric conditions suitable for both human and chronic physiology. While Kithara engineers monitored the proceedings through harmonic interfaces that let them participate without leaving their optimal environment, Thrax himself was even more impressive in person than Rex had expected. The chronic commander stood nearly 4 meters tall, his chitinous exoskeleton bearing the scars of countless hunts, his 6 arms ending in claws that showed the kind of wear that came from decades of successful predation. But what struck Rex most was the intelligence in the alien's compound eyes. This wasn't just a mindless hunter, but a tactical genius who had built a reputation on never losing prey. Human Rex Thompson, Thrax said in heavily accented but fluent galactic standard, "You have placed me in an unprecedented situation. In 3 centuries of hunting, no prey species has ever successfully trapped a chronic fleet." "That's because," Rex replied, his welding torch resting across his knees like a scepter of office, "you've never hunted engineers before. You've been chasing prey, Commander. We're predators. We just hunt problems instead of people." Sparks chittered from his position beside Rex's chair. The sound-carrying harmonics that Rex had learned indicated amusement, mixed with satisfaction. The small Kithara had become something between a translator and a co-conspirator in the negotiations, helping Rex navigate the complex diplomatic protocols while ensuring that Kithara interests were properly represented. "Your proposal," Thrax continued, consulting a holographic display that showed the terms Rex had transmitted to the trapped fleet, "is ... unusual. You offer to release my ships and crews unharmed in exchange for what you call a cultural exchange program." "That's right," Rex said, leaning forward in his chair. "See, Commander, the way I figure it, this whole situation started because of a misunderstanding. Your people are hunters. You see a species that builds instead of fights, and you assume they're prey. But the Kithara aren't prey any more than humans are. They're just a different kind of predator." Thrax's compound eyes fixed on Sparks, studying the small creature with the kind of intensity that had made the Chronique the most feared hunters in the galaxy. "Explain." Rex stood and moved to the chamber's main display, where holographic images showed the scope of Kithara engineering throughout. Titan 7. "The Kithara don't hunt individual targets, Commander. They hunt entire planets. They take worlds that are hostile to life and transform them into something that serves their needs. That's not prey behavior. That's apex predator behavior on a scale your people have never encountered." Thrax studied the displays with growing interest. The holographic representations showed not just the current state of Titan VII's crystal network, but projections of what the planet could become with full Kithara development. A world-spanning engineering system that could manipulate matter and energy on a scale that dwarfed most space-based civilizations. "You're suggesting," Thrax said slowly, "that we have been hunting the wrong prey." "I'm suggesting," Rex replied, "that you've been hunting potential partners. Commander, your people are the galaxy's greatest individual fighters. The Kithara are the galaxy's greatest system builders. Humans are the galaxy's greatest problem solvers. What do you think we could accomplish if we worked together instead of trying to kill each other?" Sparks moved to the display and began highlighting sections of the planetary network, accompanied by harmonic communications that Rex's translation system rendered as technical specifications. The small creature was showing Thrax something that made the Chronic commander's posture shift from defensive to deeply thoughtful. "What is it showing me?" Thrax asked. "Combat applications," Rex said, grinning as he realized what Sparks was demonstrating. "See, the thing about engineers is that any tool can become a weapon if you use it right. The Kithara built this planetary network for environmental control and resource management. But the same systems that can optimize atmospheric composition can also create atmospheric weapons. The same resonance fields that maintain structural integrity can also tear apart enemy ships." Thrax's compound eyes began to glow with something that Rex recognized as predatory enthusiasm. "You're proposing to weaponize planetary engineering." "I'm proposing to make hunting more interesting," Rex corrected. "Commander, how long has it been since your people faced a real challenge? When was the last time you encountered prey that could fight back effectively?" The silence that followed was broken by a sound that Rex had never heard from a Chronic before, something that might have been laughter, if laughter could strip paint from metal surfaces. "Human Rex Thompson," Thrax said finally, "you are suggesting that we abandon our traditional hunting practices in favor of, what? Engineering challenges?" "I'm suggesting that there's more than one kind of hunt," Rex replied. "Your people hunt individual prey. But what if you could hunt entire star systems? What if instead of tracking creatures through forests, you could track civilizations through space? What if the ultimate prey wasn't a single target, but an entire galactic threat that could only be defeated through perfect coordination between hunters, builders, and problem solvers?" Sparks began broadcasting new holographic displays that showed star maps with sections highlighted in different colors. Rex realized the creature was showing Thrax something that made his own pulse quicken with excitement. Evidence of galactic-scale threats that would require the combined abilities of multiple species to address. "The Void Swarm," Thrax said, his voice carrying a note of recognition that suggested the Chronic were already aware of at least some of these threats. "The Entropy Cult, the Machine Hegemony. You're suggesting that these represent worthier prey than individual species?" "I'm suggesting," Rex said, feeling the negotiation shift towards something far more ambitious than he had originally planned, "that maybe it's time the galaxy's greatest hunters, greatest builders, and greatest problem solvers stopped fighting each other and started working together to hunt things that actually threaten galactic civilization." The pause that followed stretched long enough for Rex to wonder if he had overreached. Then Thrax made a gesture with his primary arms that Rex's cultural database identified as a formal Chronic salute, a kind reserved for acknowledging worthy opponents. "Human Rex Thompson," Thrax said, "you have given me much to consider. But I must ask, what proof do you offer that this cooperation would be more satisfying than our traditional hunting practices?" Rex exchanged what had become a familiar look with Sparks, then moved to the chamber's communication controls. "Well, Commander, as it happens, we've got a live demonstration ready. Tell me, how do you feel about hunting things that hunt planets?" The display that flickered to life showed long-range sensor readings from the edge of the star system. Massive geometric structures that clearly weren't natural, moving through space with the kind of purposeful trajectory that suggested intelligent design and hostile intent. "Machine Hegemony Scouts," Thrax identified, his voice carrying the kind of excitement that Rex associated with humans who had just been offered their dream job. "They've found this system. They've found this system," Rex agreed, "and they're probably expecting to encounter either defenseless prey or conventional military resistance. What they're not expecting is a planet that can fight back, crude, by species that specialize in impossible solutions to impossible problems." Sparks began broadcasting rapid-fire harmonic communications that Rex's translation system couldn't quite keep up with. But the general meaning was clear. The small Kithara was outlining tactical possibilities that involved using the planet's entire engineering network as a single massive weapon system. How long until they arrive? Thrax asked, and Rex could hear the predatory anticipation building in the alien's voice. 18 hours, Rex replied. Just enough time to integrate your fleet's weapon systems with the planetary network and teach your hunters how to coordinate with Kithara engineers. Thrax studied the approaching threat with the expression of someone who had just been offered the chance to hunt the most dangerous prey in the galaxy. Human Rex Thompson, if this cooperation proves as satisfying as you suggest, the Chronic would be interested in discussing longer-term arrangements. Commander, Rex said, settling back into his chair with the satisfaction of an engineer who had just solved an impossible problem. I think that could be arranged. But first, let's see how well hunters, builders, and problem solvers work together when the prey shoots back. As alarms began sounding throughout the Crystal Network, signaling the arrival of scouts from a machine intelligence that had consumed entire star systems, Rex couldn't help but reflect on how his simple welding job had evolved into the foundation for what might become the galaxy's first truly cooperative defense alliance. He just hoped they were all good enough at their respective specialties, too. Survive the learning process. The machine hegemony scouts arrived at Titan 7 exactly when Rex's calculations had predicted they would, but their appearance was far more disturbing than anything the long-range sensors had suggested. Instead of the relatively simple geometric constructs that most artificial intelligences favored, these were organic machine hybrids that pulsed with their own internal lighting and moved through space with the fluid grace of living creatures. Biomechanical integration. Thrax observed from his position in the Joint Command Center that Rex and the Kithara engineers had constructed in record time. The hegemony has been assimilating organic species to improve their tactical flexibility. Rex studied the approaching scouts through the enhanced sensor array that combined human electronics, Kithara crystal resonance detection, and chronic predator tracking systems. The hybrid technology was producing readings that none of the individual species could have achieved alone, giving them unprecedented detail about the incoming threat. Those aren't just scouts, Rex realized with growing concern. They're harvesters. They're here to collect biological samples from every species in the system, including us. Sparks chittered with harmonics that Rex's translation system rendered as urgent technical data. The small Kithara had been monitoring the machine scouts' transmission patterns and had discovered something that changed the entire tactical situation. The approaching ships were broadcasting detailed biological scans of everything they encountered, sending the information back to the main hegemony fleet that was still several days away. They're not planning to conquer this system, Rex said, understanding flooding through him as he analyzed Spark's data. They're planning to consume it. Every organic life form, every technological innovation, every cultural achievement. Hegemony wants to add it all to their collective intelligence. Thrax's response was a sound that combined predatory satisfaction with something approaching joy. Finally, the Chronic commander said, "Prey that presents a genuine challenge." How long before the main fleet arrives? 4 days, Rex replied, watching as the machine scouts began deploying what looked like sensor probes throughout the outer system. But here's the thing, Commander, we're not just dealing with one threat. If the hegemony is harvesting biological and technological data from this encounter, every species in the galaxy is going to be at risk. The implications hit everyone in the command center simultaneously. This wasn't just a local defense situation, it was the opening move in what could become a galaxy-wide assimilation campaign. The machine hegemony had found a system containing 3 species with unique capabilities, and if they successfully harvested data from humans, Kithara and Chronic, they could use that information to overcome similar species throughout known space. Then we make sure they don't learn anything useful, Rex said, moving to the primary tactical display where holographic representations of the approaching scouts mingled with defensive positions throughout Titan VI's crystal network. Sparks, Can the planetary system handle full-scale combat operations while maintaining sensor stealth? The Kithara's response was complex technical specifications mixed with tactical assessments. It suggested the answer was yes, but only if they could maintain perfect coordination between all three species' capabilities. Acceptable, Thrax said, studying the tactical display with the focused intensity that had made him the most successful hunt commander in Chronic history. But I propose we modify the engagement parameters. Instead of simply defeating these scouts, we use them to send a message to the main hegemony fleet. What kind of message? Rex asked, though he was already beginning to suspect what the Chronic commander had in mind. The kind that makes them reconsider whether this system represents valuable prey or dangerous predators, Thrax replied, his compound eyes gleaming with anticipation. The battle that followed redefined Rex's understanding of what was possible when three completely different approaches to warfare worked in perfect coordination. The Chronic provided individual tactical excellence and predatory instincts that could predict enemy movements before they happened. The Kithara provided planetary-scale engineering systems that could manipulate the battlefield on levels that conventional military doctrine couldn't account for. And humans provided the kind of creative problem-solving that turned standard tactical situations into opportunities for impossible solutions. The first phase began as the machine scouts entered Titan VII's outer atmosphere. Instead of the conventional missile or energy weapon defense that most species would have deployed, the planetary crystal network created something that Rex privately thought of as controlled atmospheric chaos, pressure waves, and electromagnetic fields that didn't destroy the approaching scouts, but instead forced them into specific flight patterns that looked random but were actually precisely planned. They're adapting, Thrax observed, monitoring the scouts' response to the atmospheric manipulation. Biomechanical systems are adjusting flight patterns to compensate for environmental interference. That's what we want them to do, Rex replied, watching as the machine scouts' adaptive responses triggered the second phase of their defense plan. Sparks, initiate resonance cascade on my mark. The Kithara engineer's response was a harmonic pattern that Rex had learned indicated readiness, mixed with anticipation. Around them, the crystal network began building toward the kind of resonance cascade that had disabled the Chronic fleet, but this time with modifications that took advantage of everything they had learned about machine hegemony technology. Mark. Rex said that the effect on the machine scouts was immediate and spectacular. Their biomechanical systems, designed to adapt to conventional threats, had no defense against harmonic resonance that targeted the interface between organic and mechanical components. The scouts didn't crash, they came apart, their hybrid systems literally separating back into organic and mechanical components that fell to Titan VII's surface like technological rain. But the real success of the operation became clear when Sparks began analyzing the data streams that the disabled scouts had been transmitting back to the main hegemony fleet. Instead of detailed intelligence about human, Kithara, and Chronic capabilities, the machine intelligence would receive corrupted data that painted the system's defenders as far more primitive than they actually were. Perfect deception, Thrax said with approval. The hegemony fleet will arrive expecting to encounter conventionally inferior resistance. And instead, Rex said, grinning as he watched the final pieces of his plan fall into place, they're going to discover that sometimes the best defense is a really, really good offense. The next 4 days passed in a blur of preparation that pushed all three species beyond their previous limits. The Chronic fleet, now fully integrated with the planetary crystal network, became mobile weapons platforms that could draw on the planet's entire energy grid for power. The Kithara engineers developed new applications for their resonance technology that could disrupt mechanical systems, biological functions, or the hybrid interfaces that the machine hegemony relied on. And Rex found himself coordinating between systems and species in ways that required him to think like an engineer, fight like a predator, and solve problems that no single species could have handled alone. When the main hegemony fleet finally arrived, it consisted of 12 massive vessels that dwarfed anything in the combined defensive forces. But size, as Rex had learned during his years of construction work, didn't always determine the outcome of a confrontation. All units commence Operation Predator's Gambit. Rex broadcast on the Joint Command frequency as the machine fleet entered the system's outer reaches. What followed was less a battle than a demonstration of what three species could accomplish when they stopped competing and started cooperating. The machine hegemony had expected to encounter primitive resistance that could be overwhelmed through superior technology and numbers. Instead, they found themselves facing an integrated defense system that used their own adaptive capabilities against them. The planetary crystal network didn't just defend against the machine attack, it learned from it, incorporating successful defensive innovations into the network's permanent capabilities. The Chronic fleet didn't just fight individual ship-to-ship battles. They coordinated with planetary systems to create tactical advantages that multiplied their individual effectiveness. And Rex didn't just solve immediate technical problems. He helped orchestrate a defense that would protect not just this system, but serve as a template for similar cooperation throughout the galaxy. By the time the last machine vessel was disabled and drifting powerless in space, Rex realized that they had accomplished something far more significant than a successful defense. They had created a new model for interspecies cooperation that could address threats no single civilization could handle alone. "Commander Thrax," Rex said, as they watched the defeated hegemony fleet being systematically dismantled by combined salvage operations, "I think we found our new kind of hunt." The Chronic's response was a sound that Rex was learning to interpret as deeply satisfied agreement. "Indeed, human Rex Thompson, and I suspect this is only the beginning." As Sparks began broadcasting the technical specifications for their integrated defense systems to allied species throughout the galaxy, Rex couldn't help but smile. He had come to Titan 7 as a welder looking for steady work. He was leaving as one of the architects of what historians would later call the cooperative defense revolution, a new approach to galactic security based on the simple principle that builders, hunters, and problem solvers were always more dangerous working together than apart. But the real measure of their success wasn't in the military victory or the technological innovations they had developed. It was in the sight of human engineers working alongside Kithara builders and Chronic warriors to repair the damage from the battle. Their different approaches to problem solving, creating solutions that none of them could have achieved alone. 6 months after the machine war, Titan 7 had become the headquarters of what galactic media had dubbed the Impossible Alliance, a cooperation between species so different that most diplomatic experts had declared successful partnership theoretically impossible. Rex Thompson, now bearing the somewhat grandiose title of Chief Integration Engineer, stood in the observation deck of the orbital platform that served as the Alliance's primary research facility and marveled at how much had changed. The platform itself was a masterpiece of hybrid technology that combined human engineering pragmatism, Kithara crystal resonance systems, and Chronic predator efficiency optimization. More importantly, it was staffed by teams of engineers, hunters, and builders who had learned to think of their different approaches as complementary rather than competitive. Status report on the Vega Colony Integration Project, Rex said into his communication system, addressing teams scattered across 3-star systems who were working on the first large-scale implementation of their cooperative defense model. Integration. Proceeding ahead of schedule, came the response from team leader Zircon, the Kithara engineer who had become Rex's primary partner in developing standardized cooperation protocols. Human construction techniques are proving remarkably compatible with Githara crystal network architecture. Chronic tactical systems are providing security coordination that exceeds all previous efficiency models. Rex smiled as he watched live. Feeds from the Vega project. Human workers in environmental suits were installing metal framework that would support Githara crystal growth, while chronic security teams provided protection that was so effective it was almost invisible. The three species had learned to work together so seamlessly that newcomers often couldn't tell where one species' contribution ended and another's began. And the training programs? Rex asked, checking the status of what had become his personal obsession: teaching other species how to implement similar cooperative models. 17 species have requested full integration training, reported Commander Thrax from his position aboard the Chronic flagship that now served as the Alliance's mobile command center. The Andromedan Science Collective has officially adopted our hybrid technology standards for all new construction projects. The Zephyrian Council has requested assistance in developing planetary defense networks based on our Titan VII model. But the real success of their alliance wasn't measured in official requests or diplomatic recognition. It was measured in moments like the one Rex witnessed every day when he looked out the observation deck windows. Human children played alongside young Githara in the station's recreational areas, their laughter creating harmonics that the alien engineers found as beautiful as music. Chronic warriors taught human security personnel hunting techniques that translated surprisingly well into industrial safety protocols. And throughout the station, hybrid technologies created by multiple species working together produced capabilities that no single civilization could have achieved. Sparks, Rex said to his constant companion, who had become something between a translator and a co-administrator for the Alliance. Sometimes I can't believe this all started because you decided to help a human welder who was having a bad day. Small Githara's response was a complex harmony that Rex had learned meant something, like satisfied anticipation mixed with affectionate humor. Over the months of working together, their communication had evolved beyond simple translation into something that approached true understanding, not just of words, but of intentions, emotions, and the kind of shared purpose that made impossible projects possible. Dr. Thompson, came a new voice over the communication system. Dr. Nova Sterling, the human physicist who had joined the Alliance to study the theoretical implications of their hybrid technologies, were receiving a priority transmission from the Galactic Council. It appears they want to discuss formalizing our alliance as an official galactic institution. Rex felt a moment of unease. The Galactic Council was notorious for its bureaucratic approach to everything, including situations that required quick action and creative thinking. The idea of their flexible, innovation-based alliance being constrained by formal protocols and official oversight was not appealing. What kind of formalization are they proposing? He asked. Full recognition as a galactic security organization with authority to coordinate multi-species defense operations and authorize emergency interventions in threatened systems, Nova replied. Also, mandatory compliance with about 300 pages of operational guidelines and oversight requirements. Rex and Thrax exchanged what had become a familiar look of mutual understanding across species. Boundaries, the expression of practical individuals who had just been offered official recognition at the cost of everything that made their work effective. Counterproposal, Rex said, moving to the communication console with the kind of determination that had carried him through 30 years of impossible construction projects. We maintain operational independence and continue working the way we've been working, but we formalize our cooperation protocols and make them available to any species that wants to implement similar partnerships. You're proposing to turn down official recognition? Nova asked, though her tone suggested she understood the reasoning behind the decision. I'm proposing that we stay focused on what works instead of what looks good in diplomatic reports, Rex replied. The Galactic Council can call us whatever they want, but we're going to keep being engineers, hunters, and builders who solve problems that nobody else can handle." The response from his alliance partners was immediate and unanimous. Harmonic. Approval from the Cathara engineers, predatory satisfaction from the Chronic tactical teams, and enthusiastic agreement from the human technical staff. Over the months of working together, they had developed the kind of shared understanding that made formal authority structures unnecessary. They worked together because it worked, not because regulations required it. Message transmitted to the Galactic Council, Nova reported. Diplomatic response is, let's call it colorful. They're not accustomed to having their authority declined. And maybe, Rex said, watching as another cooperative construction team began work on a new section of the orbital platform. It's time they learned that some things work better without official oversight. As alarms began sounding throughout the station, not emergency alarms, but the notification signals that indicated another request for assistance from a threatened system, Rex felt the familiar surge of anticipation that came with facing an impossible problem that would require the combined abilities of builders, hunters, and problem solvers. "Sparks," he said to his alien partner. "Ready for another adventure?" The creature's response was a musical trill that conveyed enthusiasm, determination, and something that sounded remarkably like joy at the prospect of another impossible challenge. As the Alliance's ships prepared for their next mission, Rex reflected on how much his understanding of cooperation had evolved since that first encounter with a small alien creature who had been brave enough to trust a human stranger. They had started as individuals from different species trying to survive on a hostile world. They had become something new, not human, not Cathara, not Chronic, but something that incorporated the best of all three approaches to solving problems that threatened galactic civilization. And looking at the star maps that showed dozens of systems requesting their assistance, Rex realized that their greatest adventure was just beginning. From the personal journal of Rex Thompson, Chief Integration Engineer, Titan VII Alliance, 10 years after first contact, today marks the 10th anniversary of what the history books are calling the Sparks Encounter, though anyone who knows the real story understands that Sparks deserves credit for a lot more than just making first contact. That little alien taught 3 different species how to stop seeing each other as competitors and start seeing each other as complementary specialists in solving impossible problems. The numbers tell part of the story. 43 star systems now operate under integrated defense agreements based on our Titan VII model. The efficiency improvements in construction, resource management, and threat response have exceeded even our most optimistic projections. Humanity's expansion into the galaxy has accelerated, but more importantly, it's become sustainable through cooperation rather than conquest. But the real success is in the things that don't show up in official reports. It's watching human children grow up speaking Cathara harmonic languages as naturally as standard galactic. It's seeing Chronic warriors teaching construction safety protocols to human welders with the same intensity they once brought to hunting prey. It's the moment when an impossible engineering problem gets solved by someone saying, "What if we combine this human technique with that Cathara approach and used Chronic tactical coordination to implement it?" Sparks still visits the station regularly, though the creature now represents not just the local Cathara population, but a growing network of cooperative species throughout this sector of the galaxy. The small alien that once seemed so exotic has become as familiar as family, which, in all the ways that matter, is exactly what Sparks is. The Alliance has evolved beyond anything we originally planned. We're not just a military cooperation anymore. We're a template for how different forms of intelligence can work together to accomplish things that no single species could achieve alone. When new species encounter the unknown, they have an alternative to conquest or retreat. They can choose cooperation. Commander Thrax, now Admiral Thrax, an overall military coordinator for the Alliance, likes to joke that we've turned the entire concept of hunting upside down. Instead of predators hunting prey, we've become specialists hunting problems that threaten galactic civilization. The joke isn't entirely inaccurate. We've had delegations from over 60 different species come to study our integration protocols, and most of them leave with plans to implement similar cooperative models in their own regions. But perhaps the most significant development is one that most people outside the technical community don't fully understand yet: the hybrid technologies we've developed aren't just changing how species cooperate, they're changing what it means to be human, or Cathara, or chronic. We're not losing our individual identities, but we're gaining access to forms of problem-solving and creative thinking that no single species could have developed alone. 10 years ago, I was a welder who thought he understood the limits of what could be accomplished through individual determination and technical expertise. Today, I'm part of an alliance that routinely accomplishes things that individual species consider impossible, and I do it alongside friends from species I'd never encountered before coming to this planet. The galaxy is vast and full of challenges that no single form of intelligence can address alone. Threats like the machine hegemony, the void swarm, and dozens of other dangers that require the combined abilities of builders, hunters, and problem solvers working in perfect coordination. But because of what we learned here on Titan 7, when other species encounter those threats, they won't have to face them alone. And that, I think, is the greatest gift that Sparks and the Cathara could have given the galaxy, not just the knowledge of how to cooperate with alien intelligence, but the wisdom to understand that cooperation is always more powerful than conquest, and that the best solutions to impossible problems usually require the combined efforts of specialists who see the universe from completely different perspectives.